Welcome to the Briar Masterclass here at the Fabled Academy. Today we are taking a look at the deck profile for the Living Legend format with Briar. As our guest we have Charles Dunn, who won US Nationals with Briar this year. Charles, welcome to the Academy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about Briar, one of my favorite heroes.
Yeah, and we already covered her basics in the first video, but I'm really stoked to now dive into the deck list that you prepared for us.
Absolutely.
So to all the viewers who don't know yet about the basics with Briar, definitely check that video out. And if you don't know about the Living Legend format yet, we also have a basics video on the channel for that one. But now let's jump into the deck profile. Okay, I need to share the screen. Yeah, should work now, right? Okay. Charles, tell us what makes Briar so powerful in the Living Legend format.
Yeah, I think the card that makes Briar so powerful in Living Legend is right there in the name, is Ball Lightning. That's a card that just has a ton of power, especially when you're going very wide. This card it's a 0 for 4, go again if it's not fully blocked, and then it adds +1 damage to a lot of your other chain links. Things like Arcanic Shockwave and Entwined Lightning just become so much more powerful when you have a Ball Lightning to start that chain off. And even though it has 0 block, you're never going to want to block with this card. It's not very flexible, but I remember when I first saw this card in Tales of Aria, I just thought, someone told me its downside, it has 0 block. I said, why would you ever want to block? This is the best attack in the game. Like, why would you ever want to block with this? Because it's just so good on offense. And I still stand by that. This is probably the best attack card in the entire game.
Besides Ball Lightning, what are the key cards to look out for when playing Briar in the Living Legend format?
Yeah, the other 2 main cards are going to be Plunder Run. That is a non-attack action card that lets you buff up your next attack if it's played out of Arsenal. And it also says the next time any one of your attack action cards hits, you get to draw a card. And so for just a single card, let's say the Plunder Run is an Arsenal, it could be a 0-cost card that gets you 3 damage and draws you a card right back. So that's basically 3 free damage. It doesn't cost you anything because you get the card right back. On top of that, it gives you halfway to your embodiment of lightning from your hero power, which lets you get go again on one of your attacks like a Snatch or an E-Strike. Yeah, Plunder Run just has an absolute ton of value in this deck, and that's why we are playing all 9 copies of it. The other card to talk about that synergizes very well with this strategy is Sting of Sorcery. It's one of the few blue cards that we're going to be playing in this deck. Because the deck has so many 0-cost cards, Sting of Sorcery, blues in general, are not very appealing because everything costs 0. But Sting of Sorcery is so good because of its effect. It says that your attack action cards, when you attack with them, they deal 1 arcane to the hero, to the opposing hero, which doesn't sound like a lot. But when you consider that Ball Lightning amplifies all of those packets of 1 arcane to now be 2 arcane, you can see how this gets really out of hand very quickly. If you're making 3, 4, 5 attacks per turn, you can absolutely get up to 6 points of value off this Sting of Sorcery, off of a single card.
These are the main cards that we want to look out for when playing Briar. Those are the key cards, but let's go over the deck list now and cover the equipment at first.
Sure. The equipment here, these 5 pieces of equipment are what you're going to be playing most games. Let's talk about Crown of Providence first. That is, this deck is very dependent on what card it puts down to it in its arsenal, such as Plunder Run is obviously so much better when you play it out of Arsenal, as well as things like Lightning Surge get benefits out of Arsenal. And also if you find a Sting of Sorcery, you might just put that in Arsenal and wait until you find a Ball Lightning to pair it with. And when you do that, you open yourself up to disruption attacks like Command and Conquer in particular, which is a very powerful card in Classic Constructed, and it is still probably going to be a rather powerful card in the Living Legend format. So Crown of Providence just gives you a little bit of redundancy there to protect your arsenal. And also if you just have a hand that doesn't have a non-attack action for your Duskblade, then this can help you to cycle out your hand to maybe find that non-attack action. I think that leads really well into the main weapon of the deck, the Duskblade. This card never really got to see the light of day in Classic Constructed ever. It was basically banned as soon as it was released because it is just that powerful. And It is very similar to Rosetta Thorn in a lot of ways, where it's 1 cost to attack, and if you've played a non-attack and an attack action card, it gets a bonus. The first time you swing with Duskblade, it only gets to attack for 3, which is less than Rosetta Thorn's 4, the 2 and 2, which means the first time you swing with it, it's worse. But as soon as you swing the second time, it now gets up to 4, and it's just on par, and it only gets better from there. Duskblade is very good if the game is going to last at least 3 turns, maybe 4 turns. Then you start really getting value out of it. And if your opponent tries to be very defensive and block you out and take the game a little bit longer, Duskblade just gets even better. Maybe you can stack up to 5, 6, 7 damage per attack. And if they're not taking the game very long and they're just trying to attack you back and being very aggressive, that means you're going to get a lot of value out of your Ball Lightnings and your Plunder Runs, which is great for you. So this really helps to shore up the weakness in the deck about going long. You kind of get the best of both worlds. You're great in a fast game, you're great in a slower game as well. The other equipment that we have, Final Spring Tunic. This is just an all-star. Despite the fact that most of your cards cost 0, you do occasionally want 1 resource to swing the Duskblade. So it's nice to just have that for the turns when you don't want to have a pitch. Grasp of the Arcanite, and that card is just kind of the best Runeblade Arms. It blocks for 3, 2, and then 1 with the Battle Worn. And also it lets you create a rune chant. If you do have a blue pitch, it's great to blue pitch to Grasp of the Arcanite to create a rune chant, attack with your turn, and then you have 1 remaining to swing your weapon at the end of the chain. So just all around, this card is great for every Runeblade. And of course, Snapdragon Scalers, a staple in all aggressive decks, or most aggressive decks, I'll say. You have almost every one of your attacks costs 1 or less, so you can always trigger it. And you do rely on your Embodiment of Lightning to give go again to some of your attacks. So like kind of once per game, Snapdragon Scalers just lets you kind of bail out of a hand that maybe is a little clunky, doesn't have go again. You can just make it a little bit smoother with Snapdragon Scalers.
All right, so now that we covered the equipment, is there anything left to say about it, or do you want to go to the main board?
No, let's talk about the main deck here. So in the main deck, obviously, we've got the primary power cards like the Ball Lightnings and the Plunder Runs that we talked about. Most of the rest of the deck is just either efficient attacks, things like Arcanic Shockwave, Lightning Surge, these like 0 for 4 power attacks that just let you be very efficient on a card-for-card basis, right? Most cards block for 3, and if most of your attacks are coming in for 4, then you're just going to naturally get advantages over your opponent who tries to block you out. And that's not even considering the other buffs from Ball Lightning or whatever to put you even further above rate. Something like Arcanic Shockwave is great for this. It is really nice that this one in particular blocks for 3 on the back end. Sometimes your hand just doesn't quite work out, and it's totally fine to block with this. Whereas some of the other ones, like Lightning Surge, Snap, Scar for a Scar, only block for 2, so you generally want to be attacking with those. We also have a good mix of non-attack action cards to help give you go again through that Embodiment of Lightning. Things like Nimblism, Captain's Call, fill a very similar role where you're just playing this as a way to buff your next attack. On its own rate, it's worse than your attacks, right? It is a single card for 3 damage on Nimblism. But the fact that it can help give go again to an attack that might not otherwise have it means it has a lot of value in regard. And of course, you need these go again non-attack actions to activate Duskblade efficiently. So we've got things like Nimblism, Captain's Call, and Sonata Arcanics in a way that does that. You're often not pitching much into the Sonata Arcanics, but so once again, just like Grasp of the Arcanite, if you have a blue, it would make a lot of sense to pitch the blue, play the Sonata for X equals 1. So you get to reveal 4 cards, and then you still have that 1 resource remaining for the Duskblade at the end of your turn. And I think the last card we haven't mentioned was Lightning Press. That is, it's neither an attack nor a non-attack. Sometimes you might want to sub out either Lightning Press or Sonata Arcanics. They don't really fit that well together in the exact same configuration, but it just depends on the matchup. But I think both of them are very powerful. Lightning Press in particular lets you really push over the Plunder Runs. If you play a Plunder Run and they're just planning on blocking you out, then Lightning Press can help you push the damage and get you the draw of Plunder Run, which you might not have otherwise got. And that's why it's such a powerful option. And it helps turn on the Lightning Fusion for your Entwined Lightning's Arcanic Shockwaves. that wraps up the main board here.
Let's talk about a card that you have in here that is the Swarming Gloomveil, because that is also one of the power cards, right?
Yes, Swarming Gloomveil is just a really flexible card that really fits the mold of the rest of the deck. And back when this deck was in Classic Constructed, it was not printed yet. It came on Neverfest, which is after Ball Lightning, Plunder Run were banned. And it's just really fits the theme of the deck, right? You've got 0 cost, can easily get Go Again if you have created 1 or more auras. And luckily this deck creates a lot of auras with Embodiments of Lightning, Embodiments of Earth, if any of your attacks have hit, plus Rune Chance from the Grasp of the Arknight, and also from Sting of Sorcery is an aura that goes on the field. So all of those can trigger Swarming Gloomveil. And if it's just a 0 for 3 Go Again, it's fine, it's okay. It's nothing super fancy. If you make 2 auras, which is pretty easy with all those sources, it's a 0 for 4 Go Again, which is already above rate. Other cards you have to kind of work for. You have to Scar for a Scar or Lightning Surge. So you're already doing well. And if you manage to make 3 or more, that's pretty rare that you're going to get all 3. But if you do, then it makes the rest of your arcane damage unpreventable, which is relevant if you're also on a turn when you're doing Sting of Sorcery plus Ball Lightning combo. They just can't prevent it at all. It's going to get a lot of damage.
All right, so if you have... Sorry. So when we covered everything about the main deck yet, and if viewers still have questions, leave them down in the comment section. But I think we can then go to the sideboard, right?
Yes. The sideboard for this particular deck, I mainly crafted it to just give us some good points of discussion. This might not be an exactly optimal sideboard to bring into a tournament. That's going to depend a little bit on what you anticipate is going to come up in the meta. But I can talk about a few of the main cards here and when you'd consider playing them. So just starting here at first, Command and Conquer. This card is a little bit better if you are adding in a few extra blues into your deck. You only have, I think, 9 in the main deck. So if you're playing this, you probably want to add a few more just to be able to be sure that you can support it. It's very good into Fi in particular, who doesn't have a lot of great ways of blocking and is pretty dependent on setting up those big hands. So if you're attacking them with a Command and Conquer, they definitely can't have their full hand. They need to block something or at least lose their arsenal. So that's where that would come into other aggressive matchups when you just really need that disruption. The next card I have in here is Exude Confidence. This is definitely a card that is... I wouldn't necessarily say you always need it. It depends on what you anticipate the meta being. If you're anticipating a bit more slower decks that are going to be running defense reactions, that are going to try to be blocking you out, then Exude Confidence is a really good way of not allowing them to play those unless they've already blocked. It's not very good into decks that are trying to be very aggressive into you because they didn't want to play a defense reaction or an instant at all. And in that regard, if you're expecting that kind of meta, maybe you don't play Exude Confidence. But if there's going to be more defensive decks out there, then you should definitely consider putting Exude Confidence in. Next one I've got, this one is a flex. It's a very flexible card. It's in the name. I only put 1 in here because I'm not convinced it's better than the other options, but it's similar to Command and Conquer. If you do have extra blues, it can allow you to convert those 2 extra resources, right? Because you want to have 1 of the 3 resources to swing your weapon. It lets you convert those 2 extra resources into relevant damage, and this can become, it's either a 0 for 4 or a 2 for 6. I think there's value in that. I'm not positive that it's better than any of the other options currently in the deck, but it's an important thing to consider if you want to switch up your attack options just a little bit, especially if you go a little bit heavier on blues. Next, we've got the Premeditate. This is a new card as well. This was kind of the weakened version of Plunder Run, right? You get a Ponder token, and it only buffs your attacks from Arsenal. Once again, this is only a one of because I'm not convinced that it really deserves a spot in the deck. But Plunder Run, just being an insanely good card that it is, even a slightly weaker version still might be good enough, especially if you want a 10 Plunder Run basically in your deck. I would definitely play all 9 Plunder Runs before I play any Premeditates. But if anything, I think it's fine to play maybe 1 or 2 Premeditates if that's really an effect that you want and opponents are not really blocking you out, they're just taking it. It can provide a lot of value. Next, we've got the Pulse of Candlehold. This card it's It's mainly useful for its 3 block. It allows you to fuse some of the lightning fusion cards. It can get you back some ball lightnings to set up a bigger hand. It's a pretty flexible card, but it's not the best on its own, right? It doesn't attack for anything. If you play it, you don't get to draw a card. You just put them on top of your deck. So I would consider playing this into some of the slower matchups. If you anticipate your opponent is going to block you out a little bit, or maybe send disruptive attacks, then Pulse Candlehold can block really well, or it can help you set up by rebuying some of your ball lightnings to set up a bigger turn later, where you know you're going to have double ball lightning. But I would say only into those matchups. If both players are playing very aggressively, then Pulse Candlehold's not very helpful here. Time Snap Potion. This is pretty much exclusively for Prism. If opponents are playing Prism and you need to pop extra auras, or you think they might have Arclight Sentinel to disrupt you, this is a good blue to sub in. You can just play it out there, kind of maybe to end your chain if you don't want to swing your weapon, and you can just put it out there, and then it either gives go again basically on a future turn by giving 2 action points, or it can let you pop 2 auras in a turn or get through an Arclight Sentinel. And worst failure case, it's still a blue that just pitches. I think it's exclusively for a Prism, but it's pretty good into that matchup. And then we've got Warmonger's Diplomacy. This is obviously an all-star in Classic Constructed at the moment. And this card is really targeted at Chain in the meta. Chain is going to be playing a lot of Seeds of Agony and a lot of attacks that he can play from the Banish Zone off his Soul Shackles. If you can find a time where he has 4 or 5 Shackles and you just get to play a Warmongers on him, he's probably going to take some Blood Debt on the next turn. He's not going to have a very good turn. He can't play any of his Seeds or whatever if he wants to attack, or vice versa. So this can be a pretty huge tempo card into Chain specifically. And once again, the worst case scenario is it's a blue that blocks 3. And if you have an embodiment, it blocks 4. So all around, this is a great card into other Rune Blades. I guess if you're playing the Briar Mirror Match, it's also quite good there. But I think in other decks, it's very good into Chain. And then the last card I've got here is Shock Charmers. This is a card that I don't know if something like Kano is going to be relevant in Living Legend or any wizard or arcane damage source. You don't really want to be pitching for Arcane Barrier, so this just has Spell Void 2 to be able to block 2 of the arcane. That's pretty much the main use case for it. Sometimes you can maybe pitch 2 into it. I believe this does get buffed by Ball Lightning if you're doing it on an elemental attack. So maybe that comes up, but I do think Grasp of the Archmage is better in most scenarios. But yeah, just as an insurance policy, in case somebody brings Kano or something that you need to Spell Void for, it's worth the 1 slot.
All right, so we have the tokens here at the bottom. I think that's a new addition that we see in many decks now.
Yeah, of course, Embodiments of Earth and Lightning are your most common tokens from your hero power. Yeah. I think Ponder only comes from Premeditate, which is pretty rare that you would even do that. And then, of course, Rune Chant.
Yeah.
Grasp here.
All right, so let's stop the sharing and talk about the key play patterns that we want to pull off with Briar. We already talked about that in the basics video, but let's add a few more sentences to the play patterns, because now we have the broad view on the whole deck list that you prepared.
Yeah, so your most common play patterns are going to be setting up a big turn with a 5-card hand by properly utilizing your arsenal. And there's a lot of good ways to utilize your arsenal in this deck. It could be putting a Plunder Run down there to obviously get the bonus attack. It could be putting a Sting of Sorcery down and waiting for you to draw a Ball Lightning or 2 once. And it could also be just putting down something like a Lightning Surge to just make sure it gets go again, because sometimes you don't always have enough go again to go around. And so getting the go again on Lightning Surge there is very valuable. And while you're doing this, as long as you can kind of preserve your counters on Duskblade, you're doing pretty well, right? If you can just maybe keep a 2-card hand where you just go Nimblism into Scar for a Scar into Duskblade off of something like a Tunic resource. And then you get to arsenal your last card, and maybe you blocked with your 4th card. That's a really good turn cycle, because you get to keep your Duskblade counter, you get to grow it by 1, and you probably set up a really powerful card for a future turn. And if your opponent tries to disrupt your arsenal, you have Crown of Providence to get out of that the first time they try to disrupt that. And then, yeah, you don't get your arsenal card, but you still get to have a 5-card hand. and to attack them with on the next turn. I think the other thing to consider is understanding when it makes sense to go for that kind of setup versus the just going pure aggression. Sometimes you'll have a plunder run in hand and you don't know, should I play it out now to get the card draw and maybe get an embodiment, or should I play it a little slower and arsenal? And I think it's very important to, if you can maybe make that first attack and see how they want to be blocked. If they're just like super eager to be blocking, then it probably makes sense that, hey, they don't have a really good hand and you can afford to take a little bit of setup and then they're not going to punish you that much. But if they just instantly don't block that first attack, you're like, oh man, they really like their hand, they want to keep it. It might just be better just send it all and just try to push as much damage in now because they're going to hit you hard on the back end. So just get in as much damage as you can right now. You're not going to have a good turn in the next turn because they are going to be attacking you.
All right, so we already talked about the matchups in the basics video. If you are interested in hearing about that, go and check out the first video. But Charles, do you have a bonus tip left here at the end of the video?
I think that the bonus tip is just really understanding all the different breakpoints and when you need to be able to block. You get the embodiments of Earth to be able to block a little bit more efficiently. You really want to preserve your armor for the time when it's most critical. There's a lot of really dangerous on-hit effects in a Living Legend format, specifically out of something like Starvo. And just picking that right spot. Don't be blocking with your equipment or blocking when it's not absolutely necessary. And so that you can really have that good pivot turn when you need to. And in the meantime, just make sure you're always keeping up your Duskblade counters. That's going to be your most important thing if the game is going a little bit longer.
All right. So are there any shout-outs you want to give here at the end?
Yeah, I gave a little bit of shout out in the first video, but just do it again here for Tariq Patel, who originally made this version of Briar that I based this list on. He won US Nationals 2 years ago with this similar version of Briar, and I basically took his list and then updated it with some of the new cards and updated for the anticipated meta. And so big shout out to him for doing a lot of the legwork on this style of deck way back then.
Yeah, also shout out from myself to Tariq. Thank you so much. We are really stoked to see the Briar list coming back at Living Legend for sure. So, Charles, thank you so much for taking the time and diving into your deck list for the Living Legend on Briar.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated this opportunity.
And to all the viewers, thank you so much for tuning in today's masterclass. If you still have questions left, leave them in the comment section and leave a like on the video if you found it helpful. Also, subscribe to the channel for future masterclasses and watch one of our other videos on the Living Legend format on the channel.